This is your host, and tonight we have with us Dr. Erica Halla. Dr. Halla, hi.
Hello, it's so good to be back.
When I first met Dr. Halla is one of the admins for a Facebook group that I am an admin on called Saving Pets One Pet at a Time. If you aren't on that, I highly recommend you go. Some really, really, really wonderful veterinarians that have come together and some admins to kind of help guide you guys. But just like on our Facebook pages, none of the veterinarians that we have on here can diagnose or treat your pets right here and right now. They're just here to help kind of give you a sound barrier, I guess, kind of to talk a little bit, talk through some of the things that you may be interested in learning or, educating yourself on. But when I first met Dr. Halla, I said, how do you pronounce your last name? Because I wasn't sure, and I'm really bad, and I botch last names, and she says, it's like Halla. And so now every time I think of you, that's why I don't know if you saw, or anybody that happens to be on here from Saving Pets One Pet at a Time, I wrote, are you ready to Halla? I always think of that, and I wish I had a cool last name like that. For me, people go, is that like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? Like, yeah, I guess mine's kind of boring, but anyway, thank you so much for always being so free with your time and willing to just come out here and talk to us about, the crisis, I like to call it, that our animals are in. And I guess I want to get your thoughts on that too, if we talk about the health crisis, because when I speak with my clients and they come to me, I just had one the other day, and her dog has just been diagnosed with diabetes. And when she's presenting it to me, she presents it to me in a way like it's the only dog on the planet that's ever been diagnosed with diabetes. And I said, oh, no, we see dogs with diabetes all the time. She was shocked. So what has been your experience with the pet's health just in the last, let's say, 5 years?
Oh, goodness. Well, I actually don't see a ton of diabetes specifically in my practice because so much of that is lifestyle and diet related. And fortunately, a lot of my clients come to me when their pets are young and relatively healthy, and we get them on a species appropriate diet. And then things like diabetes just don't really crop up very much. But I do see an awful lot of allergies at a level that is not normal and and cancer, basically immune mediated issues are what I see a lot of, as well as the behavioral things that we've talked about before, anxiety and um, reactive aggression, which is really just anxiety on all of those kind of things. But the thing that's been really sticking out to me lately are the allergies, this sort of immune mediated problem that's also partly an environmental problem. I swear every year for the last 5 years, I have said in the summer, this is our worst year for a while. And every year it's been true. And this last year, oh my gosh, our winter was so warm here in Oregon that it just never stopped. I have had patients that have had to be on their antihistamines through December and January, and that is just unheard of. In fact, I had a patient who had to start antihistamines in January. He was doing great with his herbs for his allergies, and then all of a sudden, his whole body just got super itchy. Something bloomed somewhere, and it really bothered him. So with what's happening with the climate and what's happening with our pets' immune systems, this allergy stuff is just horrible, and I don't see it getting better anytime soon. And that includes pollen allergies, mold allergies, environmental allergies like that, and flea allergies as well, because as the climate changes, our fleas did not die this winter. It just didn't get cold enough. So
Yeah.
it's going to be a wicked year for fleas too, again.
Again, I remember the first puppy I saw with allergies, and I was kind of dumbfounded by it because that had never happened. In fact, in the very beginning, his name's Winston, and just this gorgeous little Maltese, and he started showing signs before he was even 6 months old of allergies, and I thought, oh, he's so young to have allergies. Maybe it's mites, but he came from a really, I hate to say well, there are bad breeders, but he did really come from a good good breeder. And so I thought, what the heck is going on? Why does this dog have allergies? And I know a couple of weeks ago we had Dr. Margot Roman on, and she was talking about how many generations back she had to go of fixing the gut from great grandmother, all like keep on going. I think she said it was 6 generations to get the microbiome to be healthy enough to give birth to healthy puppies. So that's a long time. I mean, we're talking about a long time. What do you, and for those of you guys who are listening, I know you're out there and you just get shy and crazy, weird to not ask your questions, but ask your questions. But if you don't, I have lots of them. So I will keep us going with all sorts of stuff that we can pick your brain with, Dr. Hala. What do you find works for allergies? Is there something that, I know it's probably different for every probably different parts of the country and what the allergy is, but is there anything natural that seems to work pretty good?
So it is really individual. And what I do with all of my allergy patients, as soon as we determine that's what's happening, is the first thing we do is look at the diet. And this is for patients, including ones where, because of when it started, because of the circumstances when they get itchy, we know for a fact that this is an environmental allergy. It's a grass thing or a pollen thing or whatever. We still look at the diet first because we can control the diet. Unless you're going to move or have your dog live in a bubble, we can't really control what they're being exposed to in the environment, but we can control the food. So the way that allergies work is there is this kind of magical allergy threshold. And all of the different allergies are sort of stacking up. If you imagine a bar graph with little segments that are one on top of another. And each of those segments brings us up to the threshold. And as soon as you meet the threshold, that's when all the inflammation and the itching and all of that starts. So sure, a big portion of what is bringing us up to the threshold might be pollens. But if there is a tiny piece in there that is, say, they're eating beef and they are slightly sensitive to beef, that will push them even closer. So if we can get the diet perfect, a lot of times, even though we haven't changed the pollens, we can bring them below the threshold and they'll feel fine until and unless the pollens get worse, and then that particular contributor is worsened. And then in those cases, now we're looking for things to deal with inflammation. I use a lot of Chinese herbs, but those are very individualized. I personally have not had a ton of success with quercetin, but I think that's because the patients that I see with allergies just have really bad allergies.
Yeah.
So I think if you had someone who had mild to moderate environmental allergies, that quercetin might work really well. And a lot of times it's packaged with some enzymes too, which can help with overall inflammatory levels. Yeah. So as far as just like the easiest thing to grab off the shelf, that works. Also, if you can get local bee pollen or local raw honey, local unfiltered raw honey is a great way to get, essentially they get a little bit of exposure to the pollens as they're eating them, and it sort of desensitizes them to the pollens. But it has to obviously be local, so it's got the pollens from your area, and then it has to be raw and unfiltered so that they're actually in the honey. But those two both can be really helpful things.
Yeah, so if you go, Terry, real quick, I just want to let you know this show is always, I call it a show. I don't know what else to call it. I don't like to call it a show because I feel like it minimizes how smart you guys are. Like, it's not a show. There's no acting or anything going on. But Terry, this is always about whatever you want it to be about. So the vets that have so graciously given their time will answer any questions that you have. We just started talking about allergies. Going back to the bee pollen, if you can find a beekeeper in your area and get it straight from that, you'd be surprised. A lot of people are getting into that. One of my really good friends, out of nowhere, decides to start a bee farm. Like, she started researching it, and she's very local. She's right here in my area. I couldn't believe it. She wears the whole beehive thing. I was so proud of her. So that's when Dr. Hala was saying local bee the honey. It's because they're getting the pollen from the flowers in your area and then creating the honey, and then that's how we desensitize your pet to the pollens, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
I remember the first time I learned that, I was like, that's so interesting, and it makes sense because I remember when I was younger, my brother was allergic to cats, and my mom said, "Well, we're going to get you a couple cats." Put him through it, and it worked. It really, I don't know how it worked, but it all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, it was a couple months, but then one day he wasn't allergic to him anymore. So, and I think he was pretty happy because he's a pretty big cat lover. So, but anyway, it's just all interesting how we kind of go about using honey, which is a very healthy thing, to desensitize our animals in different ways. I have seen the Corsequin work for mild allergies myself, but I don't, I've had, like, it didn't work on the dog Winston I told you about. His were so severe.
Yeah.
So severe. Have you, going back to some of the other, veterinarians that I have talked to, and they talked about the gut microbiome, which you and I have talked about, and the importance of that. Do you think that also might be able to help our pets if we're
Absolutely
feeding some probiotics?
Yes. And unfortunately, it can be very challenging, as I'm sure you've probably heard, because if you're taking probiotics, just any random probiotics, they actually don't colonize your gut. So you have to keep taking them for them to keep doing what they're supposed to do. Unless you change your diet in such a way that whatever new population it is that you're trying to bring on is happier now with what's happening in your guts as far as food and fiber and all of that. But that's super tricky, and we don't know very much about that yet. So other than like making a recommendation for healthy species appropriate diets with prebiotic fiber, there's not really a lot more specific recommendation we have about that. But making sure that you're doing good quality probiotics, that can help. The more species appropriate they are, so like the animal biome products, unless you've got someone else in your community who's doing fecal transplants, the animal biome products make it really easy to access that kind of a probiotic, which is absolutely the best that you could get for a dog or a cat, coming from other healthy dogs and cats. So we know that it's appropriate dog and cat probiotics rather than just some lactobacillus something or other, which is not bad, but it's not as good as it could be. And we've known for a long time that there is a correlation between the level of parasites in the gut and allergic reactions. So we are making our lives so clean that our bodies are just finding whatever they can to react to. If you have a few parasites, like not lots, we don't want so many that they make you sick, but if you have a few, it helps to train your immune system to not get excited about every little thing. Just like if you're out eating some dirt and ingesting some microbes that they're not pathogenic, they're not probiotic, they're not going to live in your gut, but they go through your gut and your gut sees them. That's another way that your immune system can learn to tolerate things that are not self, but also not harmful. So the more we live inside, the more our pets live inside, the less exposure we have to dirt and to low levels of parasites. If you're doing a heartworm preventative every month, you are also clearing the gut out every month of any parasites, which in some circumstances that's really important. But generally speaking, we'd like to have a few if we could, just not enough to make them sick. So it's this balance that we have to find.
I have wondered, how do you feel about dewormers? Because I feel like that is just kind of ruining our dogs.
Yeah, it's a challenge. And there's certainly evidence from horses. There may be some evidence in dogs as well that these dewormers also decimate the gut biome. So they're not antimicrobials, they're antiparasitics, but they are somehow also killing gut flora, normal gut flora that we want to keep around. So doing an antiparasitic, a dewormer, is actually kind of similar to doing an antibiotic. Just we fortunately don't usually have to do so many days in a row, so it's not quite as harmful to the gut, but it does kind of clear everything out both the good and the bad. So I take, this is kind of funny because I do this in a couple of different ways in my practice, but I take more of a sort of livestock approach to deworming in most cases. In livestock, we no longer are trying to deworm them completely all the time. Our goal is not zero parasites because that is how we get parasitic resistance as well to our dewormers. And there aren't any new dewormers coming up on the market. So if we want to keep using them, we have to be careful with them. So what we do is we look at how many eggs there are per gram of feces to determine, does this animal have a really huge parasite load? Do they have just a little bit of a parasite load? And if it's huge, then we deworm, knock it back so that the worms aren't taking all their food and making them sick. But our goal is not to clear the gut completely out. And I think that that's part of the problem in dogs and cats, is that our goal always is to clear the gut completely out. And there are some cases, like with very small children and immune compromised adults, where that can be important. But for most of us that are relatively immune competent, are adults, or don't have super small children in our houses, having pets that have a few roundworms or a few hookworms is not a huge deal, as long as they're not getting sick. And as long as we're making sure we're watching them to make sure they don't get sick and using good hygiene ourselves, then that's really actually probably better for them.
It's such an interesting take. I mean, I agree that we are over cleaning everything. It's so much. I have this conversation quite often with my clients not to bathe their dogs so much because the microbiome, the skin's microbiome. Like I told a lady the other day, I bathe my dog every 2 months usually. I mean, sometimes I go longer if I can. And she was shocked. She couldn't believe it because we were talking, and it was interesting because we were talking about how expensive it is to have your dog groomed. And I agree. Like I'm not over here saying, oh, it's super cheap. And I said, well, you don't have to bathe them this often. And she couldn't believe it. And so I'm glad to hear you say that. But what an interesting take to think that 1 or 2 roundworm might not be the most horrible thing in the world, so long as your animal it's not getting out of control and those kind of things. Let your dogs play in the dirt, I guess, so to speak.
Yes.
So Terry wants to know, and Terry, you are not alone, and I'm sure Dr. Hala would agree. It's hard when we get all these different kinds of opinions from different smart people, right? Veterinarians are smart people. They get accepted to vet school, for God's sake. And let me tell you how hard that is just to even get into vet school. And then they come out of vet school and they all have different opinions. And those different opinions become that way because of different experiences. So it doesn't mean that somebody doesn't know what they're talking about. It's just different experiences. So Dr. Hala, I guess my question, or Terry's question to you, from your experience, how would you go about lowering the BUN? She's heard protein, phosphorus, all these different things. Do you have an opinion on that?
So the short answer is I probably wouldn't. And the longer answer is this. So first of all, a BUN of 47 for somebody who is eating a raw diet or a meat-based diet when it's gently cooked, that's really not too bad. Raw-fed dogs tend to have higher BUNs than dogs who are eating processed food. And that is something that has been established for a long time. Now, that said, the BUN to me is the least important of the kidney markers. So I kind of don't care about it. And I don't even know why it's included with blood work anymore, kind of. I mean, I do, but it's not as useful as some other things. So the things that I am most concerned about when I have a patient who does or may have kidney disease is the creatinine. The creatinine is a much better marker of kidney health, and the creatinine is not changed by dietary protein. So it's a really good one to look at for somebody who is eating a higher protein diet. And yes, the phosphorus, looking at the electrolytes, the phosphorus and the potassium in particular. But we can't say anything about whether we should lower the phosphorus or not because we don't know what his phosphorus is. I suspect it was included in the blood work, but because I don't have it in front of me, we don't know. It might be totally normal. Some dogs with kidney disease have their electrolyte management affected, and their phosphorus goes super high, and then they feel really sick because of that. And sometimes the potassium will go really low, and they'll feel weak because of that. But other dogs with kidney disease do not have the part of the kidneys that manages electrolytes affected at all, and not for years of chronic kidney disease. So if the phosphorus is normal, it may stay that way. And if it's normal, there's no reason to be doing anything with the dietary phosphorus. Um, and see that depending on the units and the reference range, a creatinine of 0.7, based on what I would see on my lab work, if a dog's lab work came back with a 0.7, that's pretty normal. So your dog might actually not have any kidney problems. They might just have higher dietary protein and therefore higher protein waste product in the blood. If the creatinine is normal, if the urine specific gravity is normal, so they're concentrating their urine, that's a really great indicator of how healthy the kidneys are. And then of course we'd want to know about the electrolytes as well, particularly the phosphorus and the potassium. But it's possible you don't need to change anything. When I have someone who does have kidney disease, we typically do not restrict protein. The internal medicine specialists actually argue about this. Some of them believe we should restrict protein and that increases length and quality of life. And some of them, a significant portion of them, believe that we should not restrict protein, not until very end stage kidney disease, because restricting protein early on in carnivores actually leads to lowered quality of life because they start losing muscle mass and things like that earlier than they have to, just because of how we change their diet. And honestly, because phosphorus comes along with meat, I don't usually restrict phosphorus either. When we have problems with the phosphorus, I use a phosphate binder so that the phosphorus just doesn't get absorbed, and that helps to bring the levels down.
That's interesting.
Oh,
Trying to lower it before something happens. I think I would
yeah.
ask Terry, I don't know if this would help, but how is your dog acting? Are there symptoms? Is he sick? Is he acting any different? I think that might help a little bit, and just kind of maybe Dr. Hala can know a little bit about your dog, why he got the blood test, or if it's something. It went from 18 to 47, and how long before it went to that, right? Like, did it shoot up in 6 months, or did it? I think she says 2 years ago it was 18, and then it went to 47. That's interesting. It's so
I
interesting when you talk about the protein, Dr. Hala, because I mean, it is night and day between one veterinarian and the next.
Yes.
And people come to me sometimes with tears coming down their face because their BUN is high and they have to get rid of all the protein. And and then I say, how about we talk to a couple other veterinarians so you can get a good kind of consensus, because the fear is so great put into them that they just want to eliminate all protein and phosphorus and kind of panic and go down that road. And I'm always over here going, there's a lot of people that veterinarians that would disagree with this. It's so hard.
I see that with protein losing nephropathy and enteropathy as well. So where we're losing protein through the guts or in through the kidneys. And people are recommending you, restrict the protein so that we don't see protein showing up in the urine, for example. And I feel like, I mean, there's still going to be protein in the blood unless you're dead. So the protein will still be going to the kidneys. It will still go through the kidneys. And part of the problem with these two issues is that then there's less protein for them to be building muscles and that sort of thing. So I feel like restricting protein is not really the way to go in those situations. Dealing with the inflammation that's causing the leakiness is the way to go.
Yeah. You know what's so interesting about that? It's similar to when they say, I had a client, she had a very overweight dog, and the vet just kept telling her to reduce the amount of food. And she was a kibble-fed dog, and she was feeding, at the time as a boxer, and at the time she was feeding 4 cups of food per the bag's recommendation. And then she went down to 2. Dog still wasn't losing weight. We know why. But the vet said, go to 1 cup a day. And I said, you realize that when you go to 1 cup a day, you're reducing vitamins, minerals, proteins, like all of the stuff your dog needs. And so what you're saying basically is the same thing. When you reduce that protein, the body uses protein for a lot of things, not just just waste. It's not just waste. So, but here you go. It answers your question kind of right there, Terry. This was going from a kibble to a raw diet. And that probably is what Dr. Hala, right, you were saying, is that
Yep.
it could just be that he's acting fine. She says he's normal.
Yeah, so that really explains it for me, presuming that when your vet says there are no kidney issues, that means that they obviously check the creatinine, the creatinine, they checked the urine specific gravity, and that was normal or well concentrated. Electrolytes are normal. It sounds like all of that is normal, and it certainly sounds like he's feeling well, so that's great. And in that case, especially with the diet change, a BUN of 47 does not concern me. And having a high BUN is not a risk factor for developing kidney disease in the sense of the high BUN is going to cause kidney disease, which it seems like is sort of the way the pieces are put together at the moment. And that's not true. If you have a BUN of 47 because you're eating raw or home cooked food and your kidneys are healthy, having that extra protein, which leads to the extra nitrogenous waste, which is what the BUN is measuring, that isn't actually making things any harder or easier for the kidneys. It just is. And it's not a problem as long as there are no problems, which sounds like there aren't right now.
It's so interesting when you start just kind of talking through these things, and some of it, sometimes common sense comes in, and you just go, oh yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Or when you compare, if we took 50 dogs that were eating a raw diet, what their BUN would be, and you took 50 dogs that were eating a kibble, what their BUN would be, and you can't really say all dogs' BUN should be the same if they're all eating something different. So, but they do this, they come up with this is what it should be. And that's my problem with AVCO, is that it has a lot to do with kibble. All of their guidelines are based on what kibble needs. What we need is the whole food, right? Like, what does whole food mean? And we unfortunately don't really have too much of that, but so it's difficult because you can get so much more proteins and good things out of whole foods versus processed junk food. So vet said no protein over 18%, recheck BUN in 3 months. No protein over 18%. I mean, she must be looking at like the bags, because when you flip the bags over, it'll say, she's talking about
that's
the crude
gotta
analysis.
Exactly. That has to be like dry matter basis, which
That's what can you
you
explain that
can
to her
do
a little
all
bit?
of that calculation for your raw diets, your homemade diets, but it is a little bit challenging. So when we're discussing food and amounts of things, like we say 18% protein, that is on a dry matter basis. So if your can of wet food says it's 18% protein, that doesn't mean that 18% of what is currently in that can is protein. That's 18% of what is left when all of the water is gone. And obviously, in a canned food or a fresh food, there's quite a lot of water. Whereas in a kibble, there is not very much water. There's a little bit, but not very much. So when we're talking about these percentages of proteins or fats or whatever, typically in our industry, in the veterinary industry, we are talking about what you read on the back of the bag, which is the dry matter analysis. And I I don't know why we're talking about that, since what is on the back of the bag, that's like talking about, I don't know, Ensure or Slim Fast or something. It's talking about a processed food rather than like, this is how much protein you should have per day. When we talk about that for humans, for example, we talk about you should eat so many grams of protein per day, because nobody's expecting you to do a dry matter analysis on your food. And your food does not typically come in a bag like the kibble does that has the dry matter analysis there for you. So we just don't talk about it like that in veterinary medicine, because at this point, still the majority of pets and the majority of veterinarians are working from kibble.
Right. So, Terry, I wanted to let you know, we have another question coming through on Instagram, which I'll ask in a second, but there is actually an app. It's called it's a dry matter app. And you actually can just plug in your numbers and it'll actually give you the protein if you want to get into doing it, because that's what Dr. Hala is talking about. It's a math thing you have to do. You have to plug in stuff and you have to do a lot to find out exactly how much is in there, and they don't even list the carbohydrate, so you have to figure out the carbohydrate. really difficult to figure out exactly how much protein is in your food. So, but there are some apps that you can do it. If you put in dry matter basis app, that might help you a little bit if you want to know. But you're feeding raw, gently cooked food, which I think is your best bet anyway. So I wouldn't
Yep.
worry. Yeah, so much about. We have the same problem with pancreatitis and fat, right? Some vets say, oh my gosh, you had pancreatitis, you got to lower your fat. And some say, oh no, you got to make sure it's good fats. And so it's the same constant yes, no, yes, no. I feel so sorry for people because it's difficult. Any recommendations for, this came across on Instagram, any recommendations for probiotics? I know you had mentioned the animal biome, which if you were just coming on, I don't have a name on our Instagram, but if you were just coming on, Dr. Hala had mentioned fecal transplants, which we can kind of talk about, but do you have any probiotics that might be easier for them to get a hold of?
Yeah, so like we mentioned earlier, the animal biome does these freeze-dried fecal transplants that you can purchase online and use like a probiotic capsule. But aside from that, because the other thing is those are relatively expensive compared to other probiotics, and that can be limiting for some people who want to add a probiotic. Right now, there are two others that I really like and have seen good results with. One is from Garden of Life. It's the Primal Defense probiotic. So it's soil-based organisms, which is this new, this new trendy thing in probiotics. But like we were talking about earlier, eating dirt and the organisms in dirt is really helpful for our guts, our immune systems, the whole thing. So these soil-based probiotics, like the Primal Defense, are really good. And then Herbsmith. So the Primal Defense is a human product that I use in my veterinary patients, and we have great success. And then if you want a product that is designed for dogs and cats, there's one from Herbsmith called Microflora Plus. And that one I really like when we have digestive issues because it has a probiotic, it has some digestive enzymes, and it has some digestive supporting herbs like licorice and ginger. So I like that it's sort of this complete package.
Yeah, Herbsmith is a great product. I've had good results from that too. It's helpful. As I love the fecal microbial transplants. That's what they're called, FMT pills from Animal Biome, but they are very, very expensive. Mm-hmm. They're. I'm not saying that they're not worth it. I'm just saying that they're upwards to over $200. So now they have, I think, two of them. One is for raw fed dogs and one is for kibble fed dogs, which is interesting. But the raw fed are $250 for a 30-day supply of it. So it's nice to have you give these recommendations for a couple of things that we might be able to try first before going down that road. So, and I will say this, sometimes the FMT pills, the fecal transplant pills, are too much. I've had some dogs where it's too much for them. They didn't need that much, and it can kind of go that route. Terry wants to know what you think about kefir as far as probiotic from kefir.
Yes, I love fermented food as a probiotic source. I have these other two I recommend because most of the time when I'm talking about probiotics with clients, we're dealing with situations where like post-antibiotic or whatever, where the gut really needs some major help. And I feel like fermented foods are often not enough for that. But for regular everyday supplementation to just try to build a healthy biome and maintain it, using kefir, fermented vegetables like sauerkraut, which is fermented cabbage, or plain yogurt, any of those are good. And I don't have a problem with using dairy. I know some people do, and some pets have lactose intolerance. It's not as common as most veterinarians that I've spoken to think it is, but it does exist. So you can always use vegan kefir or yogurt alternatives like the cocoa yogurt, or just skip that altogether and use like a water kefir, or you can do the fermented veggies. Just stay away from anything that's too spicy. Like I wouldn't do a spicy kimchi or something like that, but sauerkraut or fermented beets. And it's very easy to do your own fermentations at home with vegetables and salt. So that's something that you can do if you want to have complete control over the probiotic that you're making for your kids.
I need to get into doing that. I bought my dogs some kimchi. I felt so bad. Like they looked at me like, "You eat it first," and I can't stand kimchi. So I don't know what I was thinking. I just thought, "Oh, I'm gonna, I would like to get my dogs to a point where their poop can go in, and I've had them tested, and there's some stuff I need to adjust a little bit so that they can be. You guys will love this, but you can test your dog's poop through Animal Biome, and if you get a really amazing poop sample, your dog can be a donor dog, and then your dog's poop gets spread all over the U.S.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, we were talking. Dr. Margot Roman had given me her dog's poop. She flew it out here, and I actually gave my dog its poop because
yeah.
her dogs have amazing microbiomes. They're just so healthy. So it's pretty interesting stuff. So all of this stuff is just interesting, and in ways in which that we can kind of heal our dogs naturally through doing these kind of things and preventing them from getting illnesses, and just all the stuff that's going on. What do you think, when we talk about, I know we got another question. He came home with strawberry kefir saying they will like it better. Oh, I sent Javi out for
probably, yes, but it's full of sugar, which I'm sure you know since you sent him for plain kefir. We want to make sure we do not get flavored versions of yogurt or kefir or other cultured dairy, because it does have a fair amount of sugar, and then usually some fruit or something, which is not a problem. But the sugar is the problem, the added sugar. So always make sure you're getting the plain version. It is pretty tart, but then we're not going to give them all that added refined sugar. And this is part of why the vegetables are almost better. Well, in some ways they are better. So nobody's adding sugar to sauerkraut, typically.
Right.
And the other thing when you're doing probiotics is you want to make sure that there's prebiotic fiber as well. And this is something that I never thought I would have to talk about too much, but I know that a lot of people doing raw diets nowadays are really into this 80-10-10, not adding too many vegetables thing. And I think that that's not a great plan in a number of ways, but this is one of them. They need to have that prebiotic fiber, which mostly comes from vegetables. So if they're eating fermented vegetables, then they're getting the whole package deal all at once. They're getting the prebiotic fiber and they're getting the probiotics. So you can also do that with your dairy probiotics like the kefir and the yogurt if you just give them a little bit of some pureed veggies with their meal around the same time.
I agree with you 100%. I am not I lean really towards a lot of veggies, and you think about it, how do our animals get in the wild? That's why I brought a wolf expert on a while back, and we were talking about what they eat. But going back to the dirt, now a wolf is constantly in the dirt, constantly replenishing. He's not getting bathed, so he's grooming himself, getting whatever he's got. So they're constantly replenishing their body. So we have to find ways to do that with food. So I'm big with you on the veggies. Like I've even dove into that a little bit deeper now. My dogs are eating an enormous amount more veggies than they were prior to when I first started learning about nutrition. Of course, you go through this path, right? We all did, because we all just because veterinarians like Dr. Holla are saying this doesn't mean we came out of the womb thinking that our dogs should not eat kibble.
Yes. I fed kibble at one point too.
Yeah, me too. I sold it to people. I look back on it and I'm like, oh my God, I just, you don't know what you don't know until you know it. And
exactly.
But I'm glad to hear you say that you're in support of the veggies, because there are a lot of raw feeders who are just don't think there's any need for it at all.
It's such a new trend. So I learned how to raw feed from my mentor, who had been doing like original Dr. Ian Billinghurst barf diet for 10 plus years before I met her. And at the time, this sort of 75-ish% meat, bone, organs, which was 80-10-10, plus 25% or so pureed veggies was the thing that so many raw feeders were doing. It was very popular. it was working really well for everybody. And then all of a sudden, this trend of like dogs are carnivores and so they should only eat meat happened, and vegetables got dropped, which I think is a problem for the biome for sure. It's also, it makes our pets' diets less environmentally sustainable, putting that much more meat in there and not using really any vegetables. Also, we get more trouble with the like chalky white, hard bone raw food diet poops when
Yep.
there's no vegetables in there. Having a little vegetable fiber really helps to soften that up. And, you know, dogs did not, when they were being developed, they didn't go to the butcher and buy clean cuts of meat. So they're not going to get all of the nutrients that they need, the vitamins and the minerals, the trace minerals from the stuff that you bought from the butcher, the clean meat that you got from the butcher. And even if you're doing organ meats, even if you are doing like green tripe kind of organ meats that have some pre-fermented, pre-pureed vegetables on there, it's still not really enough, in my opinion.
Yeah. Or the fur. I think people
Yeah.
don't even realize that when a wolf hunts and eats a rabbit, he eats the fur.
Mm-hmm.
Like
You
all
take the
of
whole
that
thing.
fur has more dirt in it and more fiber and all of that in there. And we have to find ways to replace it. And so when people say your dog's a carnivore and all he needs is the meat and the bone, I just, that's not what they're getting in the wild. We know that.
Right.
Even a cat who is a carnivore still gets fur when they hunt and eat a
Mm-hmm.
mouse or whatever. They're
And
still
whatever's
getting
in the guts.
whatever's, yeah,
Those animals are pretty small, so their guts are pretty small, but they're still getting that.
yeah, yeah.
And that's the other piece, is that cats are obligate carnivores. Dogs are facultative carnivores. So they're kind of like, I don't know, there's really not a range here, but we'll just say they're about halfway between cats and bears are much more omnivorous. So that means they can live, being a facultative carnivore, they can live on a purely carnivorous diet, but they don't have to. They can get nutrients out of vegetables when you puree them. They don't have the teeth to grind it up, so they need to be pre-processed vegetables, but they can get nutrients out of them much more easily than, say, cats can. And they've co-evolved with us for so long that even some starchy things aren't super hard for some of them. They have a wide variation, dogs do, in their ability to process starchy things, whereas cats just simply cannot.
Yeah.
They really don't do well with starchy food at all.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because when they, when we talk about like the amylase and how it can break down the starch in the body. And so
Mm-hmm.
for a long time, the hardcore dogs are carnivore people would say they don't possess that. And that was disproven, and that they do actually possess that enzyme. Well, then that led the other side of the group to go, aha, we can put all of this carbohydrate.
Yes.
So you just kind of like, it went from all meat to all carb and nothing in between. And so we have all these
Mm-hmm.
companies now that are making these diets that are just filled with rice and potato. And yes, it's home cooked, and or not home cooked, but you can see it, but it's heavy starch, heavy rices and potatoes. So I actually tell my clients to stay away from rice and potato altogether, and just
Mm-hmm.
because I know that if it gets in their mind, like, oh, a little bit, it's cheap. So a little bit becomes a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And before you know it. So I stay away from rices, potatoes, any kind of starchy stuff. So I love talking to you and learning from you and hearing, sometimes I'm like, oh, good. See, I'm not crazy. So you're such a sound barrier. I said that she was going to help you guys feel at peace. There's no judgment, right? Dr. Hala never judges. She is so fabulous to talk to you. I hope Terry must feel a million times better knowing that BUN can be high just because the diet got changed over to
Mm-hmm.
so you're just so amazing. I know they say that about stomach acids. We talk like the stomach acid of a dog who eats protein. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like the differences between like salmonella, for example, when we talk about a
Oh,
Rottweiler.
yes. Ha.
Well, let me
I've been
lead you
going
in.
on
I know where.
a bit of a rampage with this lately because oh, I get very frustrated by people who follow science like it's some kind of religion and say, follow the science. And I'm like, well, what does that even mean? Because when I bring you a bunch of evidence that say acupuncture and Chinese herbs work, you say that's not enough evidence. But there is one study out there from, it has to be at least 10 years ago now, because I'm sure I read this study when I was in vet school. There's one study out there where they surveyed the stool of a bunch of dogs, some of whom were kibble fed and some of whom were raw fed. And in the raw fed dog stool, in some of them, they found that there was some salmonella in their stool. And that was it. That was the end of the study. That's all they looked at. And everybody ever since has been using that to hold this one study up to say, look, the science says that if they eat raw food, they get salmonella. So, first of all, none of those dogs were sick. So, the dogs themselves did not have salmonellosis. They just had some salmonella. And nobody asked anyone, because it wasn't part of the study, nobody asked anyone in those families, is anybody here sick?
Yeah.
Is anybody having any kind of GI symptoms? So, this salmonella is in their stool. And if you're practicing decent hygiene around your dog's stool, then you really should not be getting salmonella from your dog's stool.
Right.
And that's definitely a thing that has been so concerning to the entire industry that now it's a part of why we have this zero tolerance policy by the FDA about E. coli, salmonella, other microbes in raw diets that are commercially prepared. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Like, having them be clear of those things is not a bad thing for sure. But the fact is that kibble is highly contaminated all the time with all
No.
kinds of toxic fungi and E. coli and salmonella. And most of the time, it doesn't make dogs sick. So there's no recall. And those companies don't test because they don't have to. So we don't know about it.
Right.
And it's just kind of ridiculous. But yes, raw fed animals that are eating a meat based diet do have higher acidity in their stomach, which makes it so that these organisms that could be pathogenic, the E. coli and salmonella we think of most specifically, do not survive in their guts and thrive in their guts the same way that they can in ours, for example. If you eat a piece of meat that's contaminated with E. coli, you might get extremely sick. And I can't say I have ever seen that in any of my patients. I've had one patient one time who got food poisoning from raw food that had been thawed and then sat in the fridge for probably a little too long.
Yeah.
When I was interviewing the client, it came out that maybe that last meal the dog had been in the fridge for 3 or 4 weeks. And okay, that's a problem
Yeah.
for a lot of reasons. But other than that, I have tons and tons of raw fed patients. I raw feed my own cats. I raw fed my dog when I had him. And, I have a cat who has appetite issues. So sometimes her food is out for hours as we try and get her to eat it. And I've never had anybody have salmonella, E. coli, any listeriosis, any of these kind of pathogenic bacteria you could conceivably get from raw food.
I've never seen it, and I have been feeding and been a raw believer for 21 years, and I see anywhere between 40 and 60 dogs a day now. Not all of them are eating raw, but they're my clients, so a lot of them are. I've never ever heard of a dog getting so.
No.
I've just never heard
Even
of it.
Even when they eat the grossest old dried out dead rabbit from the yard or whatever, they still don't usually get sick. Their guts can just really deal with that.
Yeah. I do tell my clients about the HPP. So I have some clients who are very nervous because they're coming from a traditional veterinarian mindset where they shouldn't be eating a raw diet. The dog shouldn't eat raw, but they want to. But then they say they have children at home and they're nervous because they've been told. To that, if there's anybody listening, I recommend. I don't know about Dr. Hala, but some of the foods that you can get, the packaged foods, are HPP. It's high pressurization, and it kills off any pathogens. So there's good and bad in there, but if you're going to, because it kills off all of the pathogens. So you don't get the good pathogens if you're going to kill off, but at least it's a little bit safer. So Terry wants to know, I don't know if you know, do you know anything about Dr. Harvey's?
I do. Yes, I've had actually a lot of patients who have used it at this point. Um, there, I don't know a lot of the specifics of each of the products that he makes. 'Cause I know there's a whole line of them, 3 or 4 or more. Um, and I have a feeling that some of those have some starchy carbs in them. So watch out for that. But I know that the one that gets recommended frequently for cancer patients, for example, that one does not have starchy carbs. It's just a balancing supplement plus some dehydrated vegetables. So products like that make it really easy to do homemade DIY-ish raw. Um, I would just be careful about the premix that you're buying. So Dr. Harvey's has premixes, Honest Kitchen has premixes, Hillary's Blend has premixes. There's a couple of other brands that do it as well. And as long as the ingredients in the premix are good, then it's good. So I just check for starchy carbs and, of course, anything that your dog might be sensitive to. That's the main problem I have with those kind of products is they have a lot of ingredients. And so if you have food sensitivities, there's a relatively high chance there will be something problematic in there. But if there's no food sensitivities, then should be totally fine.
Do you know of any studies that have been done on dehydrated veggies being able to maintain any kind of like prebiotic? Because I wonder, like, once we start dehydrating and taking away the water, are we actually maintain? Because I'm not a big fan of dehydrated foods. I get that they're more convenient, and I think that I know that they've checked the proteins and all of that on them. But do you know of any studies that are
Yeah, so anytime that we process food, it changes things. As far as the prebiotic nature of the vegetables, that will be totally fine. The things that may be a little different, minerals are pretty stable, so it's really vitamins that might be reduced a little bit by drying or
dehydration?
freeze drying, just like they get reduced when you cook them. The reduction from freeze drying and air drying is less than the reduction from cooking. So I still feel pretty okay about it
Yeah.
as long as it gets rehydrated. I only have a few like cat patients that eat the dehydrated foods without rehydrating it, but that's because they will only eat kibble otherwise, and we want them to at least have something better than that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Oh my God. It is so hard to get cats. What is up with
mhm.
these cats? Come on. I'm pretty fortunate. I have 3 cats now. I got them from the animal shelter and bottle fed them. And when you get animals from an animal shelter, they give you the powdered down formula
Mm.
stuff. And I was like, oh no, we're gonna do goat's milk. So we did straight onto goat's milk. And they have never had anything but raw diet at all. They went straight from raw goat's milk to raw meat. But cats who have been on kibble, God help us, why?
Oh,
Any
they get so addicted. So there's a number of reasons why, actually. One is that because cats, as they live right now, don't usually live in social groups, and certainly they do not hunt in social groups. Even when they live in a social group, they'll go off one by one to go hunt. The way that cats do quality control of their food so that they don't eat dead, poisoned mice that then poison them is whatever they were taught to eat when they were kittens, that's what they eat. So they develop extremely strong flavor and texture preferences. So if they were raised on kibble and you try and give them something that is not a little dry biscuit, they feel like you're trying to poison them. This is not food. They don't know what to do with this. So that's why the freeze dried or
right?
dehydrated raw, like niblet kind of forms can be a good stepping stone for them. And sometimes that's as far as we ever get because they just will not tolerate anything that is moist in the least. So we have to make sure they're getting plenty of fluids that they're drinking. Um, and then there's the flavor preference on top of that. So obviously, less processed food tastes different than highly processed food. And even though their bodies cannot handle starchy carbs like at all, their liver has to kind of do a whole bunch of things backwards and out of order to process carbohydrates at all. They become extremely addicted to carbohydrates. So, gosh, I had a cat who, one of the cats who ate kibble before I knew better, And then I got him transitioned to raw, thank goodness. But he was such a carb addict that even after we did that, he would fight you for a piece of bread. He would, if you were eating potato chips, he would come up and like smack it out of your hand so that it would go across the room so he could get to it before you got to it. And then it was gone. And then he ate the potato chip. He was
Wow.
just so addicted to
Yeah.
carbohydrates, even years after I switched him off of kibble and he ate
Yeah.
only raw food.
I have the Terry, to answer your question, no, I'm not a veterinarian. I was a vet tech for 12 years, and I own a boarding daycare nutrition center. And I currently, the last 2.5, 3 years, I've been really studying esthetician skin. So I'm addicted to giving dogs baths in ozone, and like it's such a passion of mine. But I'm not a veterinarian. I have to seek out amazing veterinarians, and because of my background in public speaking, I love doing this, and I've been able to meet some fabulous veterinarians like Dr. Hala, and they are so graciously have come on here to help my clients as well as the rest of the clients throughout. But to answer your question, but yeah, the cat hotel. So I also own this cat hotel. So I see a lot of cats that board with me, and we know they're carnivores. And I cannot. It's strange to me to put a piece of meat in front of a carnivore, and they just look at, like, when you said that they think you're trying to kill them. I'm like, I think that is what they're thinking, because
Yes.
they give you this look like, oh, how dare you? Like,
Yes. Yeah.
it's so sad.
I
It's
adopted a little ex-feral kitten who had been abandoned by her mother. And this was very interesting because it was a lesson in this thing. I tried feeding her some tuna, some fish-based cat food, because that's what my picky cat likes. So I had lots of fish-based cat food around, and she wouldn't touch the raw food. She thought that was really weird. But she also would not eat anything fishy. I thought that I was going to have to force feed this kitten or something until I opened a can of chicken cat food. And she was like, "Oh, birds. I know what birds are." And she ate it up. And I thought, really, obviously, your mom is not fishing. We don't have any place around for her to fish. She must have been really into catching birds and feeding you guys birds. So that's what
wow.
you know is food. Now she eats more because she was young enough we could add to it. But in that first stressful night, she needed something familiar and would not eat anything. I tried giving her milk, even all sorts of things, and she wouldn't go for anything except the chicken.
That's so interesting. That's such, guys, that is the other thing about Dr. Hala that's so amazing. Your insight into an animal and what they think and how they feel is so valuable, I'm sure, to your clients, that people don't think like that a lot of times. And that makes perfect
Mm-hmm.
sense, right? Your mother, just like us, we grow up, our parents show us the way of the world. That's what we know, that's what we trust. And then, over time, we leave our parents and get all screwed up. But the cats, it makes so much sense. What can they trust? And cats, just from my experience, aren't the most easy to, like, if you have a cat who doesn't trust, it takes much longer to get a cat to trust you than it does to get a dog to trust you, in my
Mm-hmm.
experience. I can usually get a dog to trust me pretty quick, but a cat, sometimes I'm like in the cat hotel for, I had a cat stay with me one time for 3 weeks, never was able to, nope. But his mom told me he was feral when she got him, and it took her like 8 years. So I was like, well, okay. So, but that's interesting to think, yeah, give them something. If I ever get any stray kitties that are not bottle feeders, that's a good thought to think of, what could a mother cat have access to
Yeah.
feed, right? Would a mother cat have access to venison here in Orange County? Probably not. So maybe I shouldn't
Yeah.
try to.
They're not really taking down deer. So your
Yeah.
best bets are chicken, even though chickens are huge anymore and cats are not taking down chickens either. Or if you can get it, and at 8 o'clock on a Sunday night, I could not, but if you have access to Koha and you can get the brushtail cat food, brushtail is a big rodent. So that's those are the two most similar things you'll find in commercial cat food to
Oh,
what
wow.
a feral mother cat has access to.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, it's So I love this stuff. It's fascinating to me. So, well, we are right at our 5 o'clock. So if you guys have a quick question, shoot it out really quick. Otherwise, we're going to be heading off here. Is there anything you want to say, Dr. Hala, to anybody, or any last thoughts about them taking care of their pets?
Well, we sort of started by talking about allergies and the kind of epidemic of immune-mediated issues that I see, which includes allergies. It includes immune-mediated diseases like hypothyroidism and other weirder ones like immune-mediated um, uh, anemias and things like that. And cancer, these are all immune-mediated diseases, and they are the worst things that I see lately. And so the best things that you can do for your cats or dogs to help prevent these issues is to, first of all, feed them a species appropriate diet. That's always step number one. The probiotics that we talked about are a really great way to continue to kind of educate the immune system and calm it down. And the other thing we didn't talk about that I love for immune modulation is mushroom supplements.
Ooh.
So medicinal mushrooms, which are really amazing adaptogens. There's actually a product on the market. There's several products on the market for dogs. Some of them are not super high quality, but I've had really, really great success with super shrooms from Super Snouts. That one, I would say it's a similar quality to the professional level mushroom supplements that I bring in for my cancer patients. And you can get it on the shelf at the pet store or online or wherever. So that's a really great one. Super Shrooms, and the brand is Super Snouts.
Oh, that's super great. You're in Oregon. Do you go mushroom foraging?
No, I've never gotten into it.
Oh my gosh. I went with my son.
But we have plenty of mushrooms here.
Oh my gosh. I have to move to Oregon. I cannot believe how obsessed I am with it. My son moved to Eugene a couple of years ago, and I went up there during, I guess, mushroom season. I don't know, whenever. And I couldn't get away from it. I just wanted to be out there all day. Look, and we actually found the I don't know what it's called. I'm bad at this, but it was the Alice in Wonderland mushroom.
Oh, the fly agarix. Yeah, I love fly agarix.
Oh, we saw it there, and my son's kind of a mushroom expert, so he's helping me, and he's like, "Oh, you know what that is?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's the one from Alice in Wonderland." Don't
That's right. That. If you eat it, it will make you bigger.
I know, right? So I saw turkey tail mushrooms in the wild for the very first time. They were everywhere, and then I heard there's ones that are called, and this is interesting about false. Have you heard about the false turkey tail?
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, wow, that's really interesting and sad, because then you have to be careful what mushrooms you're buying, because if you buy a mushroom that has false turkey tail in it, it has no benefit to you, from what I'm learning. So much interesting stuff. So Terry has one more question. Are these starchy carbs all organic rolled oats, spelt, barley, brown rice, sweet potatoes?
Yeah. So like I said, I have seen a number of dogs who do okay with starchy carbs, but we're talking small amounts, and we're talking, if it's a grain, that it is an organic heritage grain. So we're not using corn, we're not using brown rice or white rice, we're not using wheat. Oats, some dogs do okay with. Spelt and barley, I feel a little better about, and sweet potatoes versus white potatoes. So wheat and rice and corn, even if you get organic, they are highly hybridized at this point and just chock full of gluten and sugar. And same thing with white potatoes. Those have been super hybridized as well. So what we want is something that's got a little more fiber per sugar, like the spelt, barley, sweet potatoes. I also sometimes do quinoa, which is not really a grain, it's a seed and very high protein. Oh, yes. Yeah, there are some Dr. Harveys that have some starchy things in them. And I would prefer not, when you're buying something that's pre-made like that, to not have them in, so that if you decide you do want to use some starchy carbs, you have total control over what kind, how much, all of that.
Yep. I was going to ask you another question, and I know what I was going to ask you. Are you still able to are you doing consultations? I know for a while you weren't able to take really on too many new clients up there, but you could still do consultations by phone?
Yes, yes. And we do have a waiting list for in-person clients that is moving a little bit now, more than it was last year. So that's good. And there's no waiting list for phone consultations. It's just whenever we can get you in. But yes, I do phone consultations for people who are not in Oregon and who would like to have. Usually, we're doing Chinese medicine kind of assessments, but we can, of course, also talk diet and supplements and all of those things.
Okay. Lori will have all of that stuff available for you. She's on the back burner. She's behind the scenes. She's helping us write all of this stuff out so that you guys have this information. I can't stress enough how when I put vets on here, I absolutely, they're on here because they're amazing. And so if you need a consultation, reach out to Dr. Hala. She's going to guide you in the right direction. And that's so important because truly holistic veterinarians are very few and far between. And you got to be careful because a lot of veterinarians say they're holistic and they're not. They think they are. I don't want to say that they're trying to make you believe there's something that they are not. But when I'm talking about vets I recommend that are holistic veterinarians, I'm talking about them understanding how to successfully raise a puppy from start to finish, so to speak. Because I find that in veterinarians that say they're holistic, they may deworm a puppy that is just because he's a puppy without even knowing if he has worms. And so there's all these different things that a holistic veterinarian wouldn't do. So please reach out to Dr. Hala if you have questions. I'm so happy. And I'm glad your list is kind of going down because my son is going to come. You're in Salem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he's not too far from you, and he needs a good veterinarian. So he's been struggling, and I know your list. I know with COVID, everybody was backed up. So, but my grandbaby's going to come see you someday. So as soon as I can get him, I also have a son, and any of you moms out there with sons, they don't listen so well. So, but he loves his dog. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and let you go. Dr. Hala, thank you so much. All of her information will be shared on my website. If you need to get a hold of my website, it's up there. Lori has already posted if you need to get a hold of Dr. Hala. Thank you guys so much for coming on and asking your questions. I can't tell you how much this helps so many people that may not know what questions to ask. And so when you ask your question, it leads someone like Dr. Hala down this path that is just amazing and so educational. Dr. Hala, thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, I'll see you soon. So we're here every Wednesday night at 4:00. We have about 15 veterinarians that are joining us. Dr. Hala is one of them, so we'll probably see her hopefully in a few weeks. I didn't want to bombard all of you guys with every Wednesday, please, please, please. So, but hopefully we'll see Dr. Hala soon. Otherwise, you guys can reach out to her. All right. Bye, everybody.